This behemoth of a graphics card is a GTX 1080, and I really like this graphics card because I think it's aged really well. So let's have a look at how this thing holds up in 2020. From the title of this video, you can see that I've been watching some random gaming in HD content lately. He recently did a video where he looked at the RX 550 to see how that graphics card holds up in 2020. And that made me look over at my GTX 1080 and think, I wonder how this almost 4-year-old graphics card is holding up. The fact that it's almost 4 years old pretty much makes it an octogenarian by tech standards. Okay, I know it's not actually that old, but I'm still interested to see if it's lost any of its high-end performance spunk. So I decided to do a dedicated video looking at some newer games and what kind of performance we're getting at 1440p and 1080p with this behemoth card. Before I get any further into the video, I just want to say that I'm not going to do any comparisons between the GTX 1080 and other graphics cards in this video. I just wanted to have a more detailed look at the performance of the card in 2020 with some newer games, just to see, how's it holding up. Now, this specific graphics card that I'm using is the Palette Super Jetstream GTX 1080, and it's my personal card that I've had for a bit over 2 years now. In fact, it was the first graphics card that I ever reviewed on this channel. Now, I really love this graphics card. It's got an amazing cooler on it, and it just performs very well. I actually had it liquid cooled for a while, but then that kind of stopped happening. And then in the process, I may have lost the screws for the backplate, so I have to rock the OG bare PCB look. And I actually think it looks pretty cool. It's got a nice retro vibe to it, even though it's still a powerful GTX 1080. As far as the system goes that I used for testing this graphics card, it's a system that I've been using for the last several graphics card videos. It's got an i7 9700K overclocked to about 5.1 GHz. It's got 16 gigs of DDR4, 3600 MHz, Corsair, Vengeance, Pro RGB, there may be an XT in there somewhere as well, and then there's just other components in there that I'll have listed over here. In regards to how I actually tested the games, I tested them at both 1440p and 1080p because I was interested to see how it holds up at those two resolutions, and then I used high settings, not ultra settings, for all of the games. Now first, we're gonna have a look at some more basic benchmarks, just averages, 1% and 0.1% lows, but after we have a look at those benchmarks, we're gonna have a closer look at some game capture footage so that we can kind of discuss the frame pacing that this graphics card delivers, because I think that that's one of the ways in which this GPU holds up very well. It honestly is a very smooth gaming experience. But before we get too carried away with talking about that, let's have a look at just the basic benchmarks. As you can see, this graphics card still holds up really well. If you're gaming at 1080p, you're gonna get some comfortable high refresh rate gaming performance, and at 1440p, it still really puts its back into it. This graphics card is a complete beast. I really love how well it's been holding up over the almost 4 years of its lifespan. I think that buying one of these graphics cards back when it was released was actually a really good value for money purchase, because it was a high-end graphics card, but 4 years later, it still has some pretty high-end performance, which is something that doesn't happen very much in the tech space, it's pretty impressive. But now we're gonna have a bit of a closer look at a couple more games, because I think that just basic benchmarks don't really tell the whole picture. Because one of the really amazing things about the GTX 1080 is that its frame pacing is really good. It's a very smooth gaming experience, which is something that not all graphics cards can say, even if they have a higher average frame rate. The first game that we're going to have a look at is Escape from Tarkov. Now, I didn't have that in the benchmarks because it's one of those games it's very difficult to get a consistent real-world example of performance with like normal benchmarks. But as you can see here at 1440p at high settings, you're getting some pretty good results with the GTX 1080, and it feels pretty smooth. It does have the occasional kind of lag spike. However, Escape from Tarkov does that on literally every configuration I've ever tested. I think it has more to do with how it interacts with the network than with the physical hardware. But yeah, you're getting some pretty good results. When moving over to Battlefield 5, again, it's handling it really well at high settings at 1440p. Even if you have a high refresh rate monitor, you may not be hitting that Goldilocks zone of 144 frames per second, but it handles it really well. And again, the game feels very smooth. When looking at Modern Warfare at 1440p, we're not getting above 100 frames per second, but it still feels very smooth on a high refresh rate monitor, and it's a very pleasant gaming experience. And just remember, with Modern Warfare, high settings is essentially the highest settings that you get, and I tested it at a fairly demanding section where there was like a lot of fire and lighting and stuff. So when it comes to multiplayer, you may get better results. But yeah, you just drop the settings a little bit and you'll get very good high refresh rate gaming performance at 1440p. Now, when it comes to the more demanding games like Assassin's Creed and Metro Exodus, it's not looking as good, but honestly, those games are very difficult to run and they're not that well optimized. With Assassin's Creed at 1440p at the very high preset, which is under the Ultra preset, you're getting under 60 frames per second average at 1440p. But again, it's pretty smooth, and if you drop the settings just a little bit, you can hit that 60 frame per second target. Now, when I started my channel and did a review of the GTX 1080, I actually benchmarked PUBG at 1440p at ultra settings, and I was getting about 84 frames per second. Now, I was getting an average of about 84 frames per second with the graphics card overclocked to its limit while liquid cooled, whereas today at ultra settings we're getting about 88 frames per second without any overclocking on the graphics card. So yeah, that's pretty impressive. I know that it's not quite an apples to apples comparison, but it's interesting to see how the game has optimized over time. But honestly, at high settings, at 1440p, you're getting an amazing gaming experience. And it's not just when it comes to performance that this thing holds up really well. Okay, feature-wise, it doesn't have stuff like ray tracing and NVENC New and stuff like that, but I mean, that's not that big a deal. And when it comes to actual reliability, this graphics card has been amazing. I've been having it in and out of systems for over 2 years, and I've not been particularly kind to it, actually, as you can tell from the state of this GPU. And it hasn't had a single reliability issue in that entire time. I've never had an issue with it at all yet. I think that's pretty impressive. So if you have a GTX 1080 in your system, look over to it and give it a nice pat on the back and say some gentle, reassuring words to it, because you got something special. And with that brief look at the performance of a GTX 1080 in 2020, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel for more content like this one. Check out my stream, which will be happening at 11 a.m. Pacific time, so that's just now. Check it out in the description below, along with any other social media. And until the next video, bye-bye.